that. Year of the Snake, it's all about regeneration. So hopefully everyone has a fabulous year coming up. This object, the Tamamushi Shrine from the 7th century, is a national treasure of Japan. And one of the panels of this venerated object depicts the tiger Jataka. So the Jatakas were the animal tails of the Buddha. It is a triptych, so it's a three-section artwork. And the story is about selflessness, being part of something much larger than ourselves. In the tale, a bodhisattva, who's an incarnation of the Buddha, once, when walking by a cliff, had heard a tiger mewing. And looking down, he'd observed a tigress, emaciated with hunger, approaching her cubs menacingly. So, no matter which religion you are in, eating your own flesh is horrific karma. And so, the Bodhisattva hangs his robe upon a tree, jumps off the cliff, offering his life to feed a tigress and her cubs, thereby preventing bad karma. The selflessness of compassion. That is the story I had recently discussed with my children. I sometimes bring them up during these presentations, and they're obviously older than these photographs because they don't like their pictures to being shown. And their reaction to the story was rather enlightening. My daughter looked at me with unabashed distaste and said something to the effect that the Buddha was stupid and entitled. How dare he project his spiritual beliefs onto a different species? And then the younger one chimed in saying, let the tiger be what the tiger be. So, notwithstanding his command of English grammar, I was actually shocked because their views are actually valid. A very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us for our 84th presentation titled Meandering, which is really about mental travels, voyages of self-discovery prompted by different perspectives. So the Nourishment Project is about joyous curiosity and about being part of something much larger than ourselves. Here are some of the references that inform this presentation. I am confident that the panda with the pearl earring brings to your mind the Dutch painter Vermeer. He's known for capturing light. So let's get enlightened. The milkmaid, bathed in light. But isn't the shadow work a bit odd? Specifically, the lack of shadows behind her. If you see where the source of light is coming from the window, hardly, I mean, if you look, the light graces her fully. It's coming, falling onto her, but the background itself is a bit more dazzling. And here she is, pouring milk into an earthenware pot. Right to the left of it, or from that point on the right of it, sorry, I have to admit someone, the blue and white lidded jar hints that we are in Delft. For that reason in Amsterdam, Delft is still known for their signature blue and white porcelain. And these blue and white porcelains were copies of the Ming vases from China, which the Dutch had been introduced to through trade and colonization. What would have been hidden in the shadows, or should have been hidden in the shadows, would be this object, foot warmer. The metal one on the right, if you look at it carefully, hints through the tulip motif. Do you see these tulips? It hints at the country of origin, Netherlands. Now, foot warmers were needed during those times, in Netherlands, because it's damp and cold. And I like the humor in this painting. And so while I was creating this presentation, my son had walked by and had asked, why are there monkeys in the painting? And I thought, yeah, that's true. Why indeed? And then I thought, well, you know what? Why not? Because what did the painters do? They painted everyday occurrences. Nowadays, or at least for the last few years, you have seen undoubtedly artists to gain public popularity. They have painted dogs playing poker. I guess now they do cat videos, cat emojis. So dogs for our times. And so for them, during the Netherlands times that we are speaking of, I have to admit someone in, sorry, here we go. It was monkeys for them. And for those of you who have been here for a while, you might remember from one of the previous presentation, the tulip mania, where there was a frenzy of buying tulips. People were spending obscene amounts of money for tulip bulbs. It was their version of cryptocurrency. So they used monkeys then. Now we're going to go back to our stories of foot warmer, the monkeys getting their feet warmed. But look further. Foot warmers were a common object in upper middle class families in Netherlands. And I do know there are some of you in this audience who were docents, and you probably know how to read the objects in this painting in many, many ways. And so for the others, since the shadows were deliberately lightened, there's a reason why there's so much light in here. Vermeer is obviously trying to tell us something. What is it that he's trying to communicate? What is it that these tiles in the back are depicting? If you look at it carefully now, if you make it out, it looks like it's got wings like a fairy. So it's a winged creature. Here is an actual tile from that time. It is a very common design. It's the Cupid. Cupid is heating up the scene because it's near this brazier for every sense and purpose. So it alerts you. What is it? Pray tell. What is on the other side? What is the design? Look at it carefully. This thing. Somebody standing by a staff. Looks like one of those people going on a pilgrim. So it's a pilgrimage. So what is he hinting? That the lovely little milkmaid is all by herself. So let's put this in context. Yes, the wooden box carries a ceramic bowl for hot coals, but during those times, a foot warmer had a metaphoric use in genre paintings. The French title translates servant for ladies or servant of ladies. And so the foot warmer was a symbol of the attention paid by courting men to their ladies. So her milk is about to boil. So who knows what embers of love are within her underneath all that restrictive clothing. I hope you get a sense of today's presentation. Where will we be wandering through all these artworks? Because that is what the description said. Great art is a monument to inner thought. We'll be traversing time and territory while we are still staying within the regions of the Spanish Habsburgs during those times. So we're going from Netherlands to Spain, Madrid to be precise, La Maja Vestida. In the artist Goya's time, Maja was a pretty young woman of the lower classes. So Goya's time, we're in the 18th century, specifically 1795. This is around the time when he painted this. At that time, Goya is the main court painter for the King of Spain, then Carlos IV. And Goya also painted commissions for nobility and dignitaries. The Mahavestida, this painting is one of them. And so if you literally translate Mahavestida, the clothed Maha, so the adjective clothed is signifying there's probably an unclothed one. Yup, look at it, same format, meant for private pleasure, because remember, this is Catholic Spain. Nudes are forbidden from being painted ever since the Spanish Inquisition. And again, remember the time when this was done, 1795. There's turmoil in Europe because just a few years ago, the French Revolution had occurred in 1789. And a few years since, in 1808, Napoleon would invade Spain and rule Spain for a few years. And by 1814, Napoleon is kicked out by Ferdinand VII. And while recovering old art, the new king discovers this scandalous peace. And the light guides you to where you look, obviously telling you to look at the Sacre Coeur because it's a Spain, the Sacred Heart. Look at the Sacred Heart lounging on lace embroidered pillows. But the puritanical Ferdinand VII reestablishes an inquisitional tribunal, which is their version of no more liberal policies. And so Goya has to leave Spain and he moves to Bordeaux, where he ends up, he's by that time he's deaf and he was almost penniless when he dies. And so another version of this lounging around insouciantly on pillows is, as you saw, Manet's Olympia. Look at all the symbolism, the orchid flower in her hair, her bracelet, her pearl earrings, the oriental shawl on which she lies, and the upright black cat, this little thing on the side, are symbols of wealth and sensuality. The black ribbon around her neck, in contrast with the pale skin, and if you recall here, she has one cast off slipper. All of that is emphasizing the voluptuous atmosphere. It's a rather white and black painting, isn't it? Look at it from different perspectives. The maid holding flowers, likely from potential client, because that is how the painting is normally read. That Olympia, what a courtesan. She's defiantly looking back at society. In real life, though, the maid depicted had a name. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. Laure, Laure, I guess in French. As you can tell, she had been painted before. The model for Olympia, Victorine Meurent, Meurent. Catherine is here. She can pronounce all these correctly. She was an accomplished painter in her own right. In fact, Victorine's work had been displayed in Paris's famed art salons before Manet was. She was an accomplished painter. And as far as reality was concerned, she couldn't be farther from the courtesan model enticing a man as she's painted to be, because she was a lesbian in real life, living with a partner whom, if I remember right, the partner was a musician. It's all perspectives, how you read these paintings. Truly, let there be light when we see these artworks. Manet's painting is almost like symbolically a color by number, because most of this stuff is all just a little bit of history repeating. Because if you look at it, this form is very well known in the art world. And this framework is inspired by Titian's Venus de Urbino, the Venus of Urbino. Small differences: instead of a dog laying by the feet, Manet has a cat. In Parisian terms during the times, for Matt, cat was a slang for female part. Give it a little thought. We have a similar term even now. Now that you're getting more familiar with the lay of the land, so to speak, here's where our real meandering begins. That was just a warm up. Behold the superstar Beyonce in a recent successful tour. Look at the outfit that she's wearing. Please observe the hand placements. The tour was called Renaissance, and I purred with pleasure at the intelligence of her choice. Because what is the flagship of Renaissance art? Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Look at the hand placements for the embodiment of love, Venus. Beyonce has a song called Superpower, and the lyrics explicitly state that the superpower is love. Yes, it is. If we travel back further in time, but yet stay in the same museum in Florence, we see Venus de Medici, the inspirational form for Botticelli's Birth of Venus. It is a first century BCE statue of the goddess of love, Aphrodite, which is the Greek goddess of the Roman version, which is Venus. This is the marble copy of an older yet bronze original, then no one knows where it is. Because history does keep repeating, look at that. Only if you recognize what is openly on display here. Isn't that something to behold? Somebody's entering here. Sorry, I have to admit someone in. Moving further yet, Leon Bakst. He was the costume designer for Ballet Russe and many other ballet productions. This 20th century drawing is inspired by a 19th century Qajar painting. So the Qajars were a Turkic clan that had ruled Iran in the 18th and the 19th century. So what is it that we're actually trying to say? That the creative mind always meanders, and this meandering is also known as inspiration. That's what this is. Look more, creative minds across the ages. Made in the first century BC, this marble copy of a bronze Greek original, the bronze original probably from the second century BCE, BCE being before current era, is now known as the Belvedere torso. It rests in the Vatican Museum. The artist Michelangelo's adoration of that object has ensured it worldwide fame because this pagan figure now adorns the Catholic ceiling, that is, the Sistine Chapel. Things repeat. I love thinking that reinterpretation is a form of preservation. Look, Michelangelo's creation of Adam is actually preserving the form of the Belvedere torso. Again, pay it forward. Michelangelo's work has inspired others. For example, his figure of the knight from the Medici tombs inspired, among others, the British artists Frederick Leighton, I guess he's Sir Leighton's, or Sir Frederick's, Flaming June. And this also inspired Jessica Chastain's shoot for Vogue cover. Do you see this? Isn't this fun? But the art director of this shoot made me smile because look what he or she did. It's an amalgam of both the poses, took both forms and made it into one. Yeah, I thought it was very clever, though the symbolic meaning may not justify this cheery cover color, this yellowish orange, whatever this is, because the marble figure of the knight in tandem with the oleander right above on the right-hand side of Leighton's painting is alluding to death because oleanders are poisonous. And so the sleep depicted on the right is eternal sleep, death. And this transports us to the painting about the poet Percy Shelley's death. Because when I'd first seen this, my mind had instantly queried, why is this English poet being cremated? Well, for one, Shelley was an avowed non-Christian. I wouldn't say atheist. He was definitely non-Christian. This romantic poet's views were imbued with Orientalism, specifically with the spirituality of India. And though he had died before he visited that part of the eventual British Empire, India, his poems are full of Indian imagery. If you've read his poems, Adonais, Alastor, and many more, you'll recognize that. Another poem or poet of the same romantic genre, heady with Orientalism, was Samuel Coleridge. He was also heady with the other Oriental object, poppy seeds, read opium. And supposedly, in an opium haze, Coleridge had composed his famous poem, Kublai Khan. When I was young in India, we had to memorize poems, and it was in Xanadu did Kublai Khan, a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to I think it was sunless sea, etc., etc., etc. Among many other poems, Coleridge had also written The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And this poem deals with guilt, consequences, and as was evidenced in the previous frontispiece, shipwrecks in the northern clime. And the reason this map is here, because it makes you wonder, because the poem dealt with killing of an albatross, but you find albatrosses in the southern hemisphere. So what had interested me, what had perked my interest, that meandering that we speak of, is why on earth did he do it up in the Arctic? He could have done it anywhere. He could have shipwrecked in somewhere much more beautiful, like in the Caribbean, somewhere south, maybe in Australia. But no, why up in the cold? Well, here's why. Let's go down a rabbit hole. In the 18th, 19th century, for trade dominance, global powers were looking for a northwest passage to find a more efficient shipping route. Those were the conversations going on. But if you look, we're having conversations about Greenland now. We were having conversations about Mars a few months before, right? All of real life inspires art and artists. And real life, if you're restricted enough, can make the mind meander to somewhere more beautiful. It pushes you into something gorgeous. If you put enough pressure on a coal, it becomes a diamond. And that's what does. Sometimes out of tragedy comes beauty. Coleridge, while he was doing all this, used to discuss his work with a family whose daughter ended up marrying Percy Shelley, the aforementioned poet, the romantic poet who was a avowed non-Christian. We know how that love affair ends up in the future because we just saw Shelley eventually dies at a very young age, around like 29. His wife, the lady shown here, Mary Shelley, wrote her masterpiece, Frankenstein, when she was 18 years old. Frankenstein also opens with a shipwreck in the Arctic. Now you should understand why it opens that way. Because she had heard these stories from Coleridge. She knew what was going around in those times. People are looking for the passages. They are trying to find all this. It's in the air surrounding her. So now what else inspired that child's mind? Because keep in mind, she was a child when she published this. She initially published it anonymously. What had she been exposed to? Okay, galvanism. Remember that term galvanized, which means to be electrified, to be shocked, to be excited? Comes from this Italian physician, Luigi Galvani. And as you can see in the bottom of the painting, it depicts he used to shock frogs with electricity. For during those times, they believed that electricity was the secret to life. And this is among the many things, scientific things, that were discussed fervently in the intellectual circles of those times. Just as now we discuss artificial intelligence, AI. I want to know what kind of art is being made now. I guess that movie with, what's his name, Tom Cruise, is dealing with AI. You see how history repeats. Galvanism finds its way into the story of Frankenstein because the creature is electrified into life. But there's much more. Around 1815, the volcanic eruptions of Mount Tambora, which is in Indonesia, had significantly impacted the climate and led to a year without a summer in 1816, the year that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. It was published in 1818, but it was written in 1816. And this volcanic eruption had released large amounts of ash into the atmosphere. In fact, such a large amount that there was a global temperature drop and unusual weather patterns, including colder and wetter conditions in Europe, where Shelley was writing. It had caused famine and countless death because of the climate implications, because of this volcano. It had most likely also precipitated the storm that eventually capsized the boat that her husband, Percy Shelley, was on. So real life meanders into the creative outputs of many. The electricity, the storms, the volcanoes, all of this was evident in the production of Frankenstein that was done by Geoffrey Ballet at that Lyric Opera building just a few years ago. And life imitates art in another production that happened at the Lyric Opera building, Faust. The opera Faust comes from a story and also a poem. It's the story of the devil Mephistopheles and the brilliant mind of Dr. Faust. That poem was 60, mark 60 years in the making by the German poet Goethe. But he was much more than a poet. Goethe was deeply interested in the science of the times, as were people. Schiller, they were all interested. And this scene from 1797 depicts Goethe. He's the man in the blue. The man in the red coat in the front is the German poet Schiller. It's Schiller's poem that Beethoven had turned into his choral masterpiece, Ode to Joy. Goethe was deeply interested in Galvanism. They were all just, they had rabid curiosities. They weren't, trapped in silos. Their minds were interlaced, completely interwoven with everything going on. And this maniacal desire for intellectual nourishment, which is the character of Dr. Faust, that was allegedly modeled on, admiringly so, on that character in the brown coat, the genuinely brilliant Alexander von Humboldt, a Prussian aristocrat who spent his life and his fortune in the voyage of discovery called life. And he realized and he proved, or at least started to establish, that nature is an interconnected system. His beliefs preceded Darwin. He was inspirational for countless number of people. He was venerated in scientific and conservation circles. Humboldt's observations and collections underpin many museums and libraries. He cataloged innumerable things. I cannot imagine where his mind meandered. And catalogs are important for mapping knowledge. This is true even in the arts. One example of that the art world is documented, was Cesare Ripa's book, The Iconologia. It was effectively a catalog. And in there, among other things, one learns, let's go back to the world of art, that only a virgin can touch a unicorn. Good to know. Next time I see one, I won't try. So this is immediately, therefore, recognized as a gift portrait for a future spouse. You know what this made me think of? It's that movie, um, Portrait of a Woman, Lady on Fire. It was recently done 2, 3 years ago. It was a painting being done to be given to a future spouse. I'm like, oh, that's what this was about. See, pinging. So the ruby pendant symbolizes the bride's virtues of generosity and divine love. Or at least that's how it was imagined by Raphael. But look, technology scans reveal that the unicorn at original point was meant to be a dog. And you can see here the dog's ears have been blended into the garment. And the dog symbolizes fidelity, which I hope you remember from when we just saw this painting. There's the dog by her feet showing fidelity. Well, since Raphael's time of the 16th century, some owner, hence, decided he or she wasn't interested in portraying marital fidelity and had transformed the painting into a picture of Christian martyrdom, replete with palm leaf, torture wheel, and the shoulders are covered. Look at the difference. But when you are a part of the wealth of the Borghese family, you do what you very well please with the arts you own, be it Raphael or not. All of this was uncovered during the art restoration. And this is what we see now. But you know what all this Christian symbolism of fidelity, of chastity, of virtue made me think of? We're going to quickly go through this because there's a larger picture. It reminded me and made me think, okay, after resurrection, this is a very famous picture. I mean, it's been done many times. It's that Jesus is saying, Noli me tangere. First and foremost, I don't think that Jesus spoke Latin. I don't think the good Lord spoke English either. So effectively, he was saying, do not touch me, not even my clothes. So noli me tangere. That was said, apparently, to Mary Magdalene after he was resurrected, for he is pure. Again, this is a very well-recognized scene. It always made me curious. Why then is this story, as painted by Caravaggio, possible? Look at all the lighting coming. He's showing you where to look. Here is the proverbial doubting Thomas, refusing to believe the resurrected Jesus until he can both see and feel. Jesus's crucifixion wounds. This always made me wonder, where is the faith? Why can Thomas touch him but not Mary? Who passes which test? I always get confused. I hope someone tells me after this presentation is over. This always threw me off. Why can one touch the pure Jesus, not the other? Anyway, moving on. By now, I hope when you see this iris painting by Van Gogh, you recognize the Japanese Rimpa inspiration for Van Gogh. Because now what we are doing, we are transporting meandering from the west into the east, my purring grounds. And one of my favorite is the Japanese national treasure, Yoroboshi. The scene depicts a blind man praying under the plum blossoms in full bloom as the sun is setting in the evening. It depends when you see all these panels, see them in candlelight. That's when they shimmer, not the harsh, bright electric light. And what the panel is saying, in the heart's eye, because the man is blind, the blind beggar sees the blue of the mountains of his childhood. And look, the blessings of faith lands as flower petals into his open, beseeching palms. What is it that I actually see when I behold this? That's where the meandering comes to an absolute stillness. I sense the Silk Roads and all that traveled during across centuries through these passageways, especially religious beliefs. Buddhism had begun in India around 6th century BCE. That's before current era, 600 years before year zero. And cultural and spiritual connections between India and China was strong by the time of the Han Dynasty, which is around 206 BCE to about 220 CE, so over 400 years. And in Western Han, because the areas get globbed together depending on who's in rule, so from 202 BCE to like 9th century CE, these are marker dates in history. The capital of the Western Han was Chang'an, which is now known as Xi'an. That's in Xanadu, did Kublai Khan. Xanadu is actually Xi'an area. Xi'an, right up there, is the eastern edge of what we call the Silk Road. And through state patronage, many monks came from India to spread the message of Buddhism. Around 412 CE, a monk, Kumarajiva, whose family originated from the regions now called Kashmir, helped establish Buddhism in northern China. And soon afterwards, there was a mass migration of monks into southern China. And so from China, Buddhism spread to Korea. And in the early 4th century CE now, Korea was part of the Chinese kingdom. And even after Korea removed Chinese rule, the Buddhism stayed. Buckle up because our meanderings are now going to gallop. Well, look, the Buddha isn't Chinese. The Buddha never lived anywhere except India, which is somewhat problematic, isn't it? To that worldview. How do you reconcile being the most powerful kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the most powerful kingdom, if your God never stayed there, in fact, never stepped foot there? What do you do? How do you reconcile that? I'm so powerful, but the God doesn't visit me. You create a foundational myth. This foundational myth originated around 400 CE in the region which is present-day Afghanistan. And so this foundational myth applies to any non-Indian Buddhist regions. So you will see it everywhere because it's really addressing that lament, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's almost, what's it? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? Same concept of being left, don't leave me. So what is this foundational myth? It's a doozy. It's called the Shadow Cave Foundational Myth, and it's brilliant in its composition. It is said that the Buddha, because he didn't want to reject his followers, he said, no, I'll stay with you. Again, a myth. The Buddha is said to have leapt into the walls of a cliffside grotto imprinting on it a shadow image that would radiantly reflect like a mirror when seen from afar, but disappeared into the rocky surface whenever anyone approached near. So present formlessly all the time, whenever you need him to be, and at the same time, forever not there. Look at that. Isn't that brilliant? That is the shadow cave. From far away, you see him. Come near, it's gone. It'll not be there. Anyway, so with that, it covers, yes, of course, he's in part of every place Buddhism exists. But the larger story we're getting to, from China via Korea, Buddhism arrives in Japan. And Empress Suiko is a high point of Buddhism developing in Japan. She eventually becomes a nun after she appoints her son, Emperor Shotoku, in her place. And by the end of his reign, there were 50 temples and more than 800 monks established in Japan. And Shotoku didn't blindly follow scriptures. He had a very independent thought. And so he took the moral and intellectual benefits of this new religion to address the concerns of illness and disaster that was in Japan, because they practiced what was called Shintoism, and they co-opted beliefs of Shintoism of kami into Buddhism. Because prior to that, a lot of the indigenous Japanese beliefs were kami, worship of nature. And so you will see how Buddhism is slightly different, significantly different from the ones in India. Japanese Buddhism co-opts a lot of these Shinto beliefs. But it's really not a problem, because Buddha himself had said when he was around, update your scriptures. If what I say isn't in your scriptures, update it, add it in, just like an amendment. Scriptures are living documents. Change it, update the scriptures. And so it did. The scriptures were updated, as were the imagery. Look now, from the left to the right. The Indian larger eyes and nose. The lips are fleshier versus the eyes that slant upward, long, slender nose. Look, the Indian ideal of rounded and sensuous forms becomes over time ethnically flatter and linear. Faces become longer and narrower. And if you look carefully, because I think there are enough art lovers in here who would appreciate this, the drapery is no longer spread out over smooth surfaces, but they are pleated meticulously in long curves. Draperies are super important in the art world, be it the Greeks, the Italians. Leonardo spent ages practicing knowing how to draw drapes. Drapery is very important in India, everywhere. So depicted on the right, this is the Kudara canon, which is known as the Avalokiteshvara. Symbolically, it means the universal savior. But more importantly for our conversation, this is modeled on the Emperor Shotoku, who had made Buddhism very predominant in Japan following his mother. Well, look now. It's this form of the Buddha. The Indian Buddha becomes Japanese in form. And this is easy to accept due to the flowing inclusivity of Eastern traditions. It's like all forms we say yes to because you don't know what God looks like. So every form is allowed. I know I said it easily, but if you apply that transformative acceptance to the belief systems of the West, imagine the amount of controversy comes up if you show Jesus how he might have looked like one who comes from the Middle East. May not be so easily accepted. But back to our story, its form. Look at the skirt hanging down in parallel vertical folds. The figure is filled with gentleness and yet has a sense of reserve and modesty. What is it saying? That it is rigid, it's lacking in movement. Why? Because it's conveying an inner strength of spirit, that it is worthy of worship, has form, even though it looks gentle. This sense of eternal grandeur is very Indian in the spiritual sense. And where does this reside? That form here resides in the same place as does this Tamamushi shrine, which had opened our presentation. It's in the Horyuji shrines in the Nara region. So effectively, we've meandered and come full circle. Just trust the labyrinth. Because what is it that I wanted to share with you? Let your mind wander. Here's your question. Without the Indian religion of Buddhism, what would the art be in? Think it through. Because it's all the art in the East is inspired spiritually. What would the art in China look like? What would the art in Korea look like? Let alone the art of Japan, the rock gardens, the paintings, the tea ceremony, all of this. What would all of this look like? Look very slowly. Look at this autumn kimono. Look at the way that it's done. The umbrella shading you from the falling beauty of maple leaves. Look carefully. The textile is covered in the tie-dye technique called shiburi. This charming detail, the shiburi, sounds Japanese, but it's actually and most likely from Indonesia. The term is from India. It's from the region of Gujarat, Rajasthan. It's a tie-dye technique, same technique going across. And so the artistic influence of the vibrancy of India over centuries has affected the art of Japan, let alone the colors. Imagine the colors of China, the celadon, the quiet color. How did color come into Japan? And look what they did to it. This is, I will unabashedly say, the Japanese take stuff, they're inspired from the others, and then they blossom it into a perfection where the original don't even come close. I am just stunned by what they do with art. Anything that they take from somewhere else, they make it better. It's like if you want to be better, go to Japan. Totally true. This concept itself will take forever, like at least an hour to go. But we're not doing that because the deeper message is much more nuanced. In the 20th century, influential artists looked because of colonial rule to see what was our greatness, the transfer of knowledge that had happened before, centuries ago. They tried to bring it back. And so Japanese artists came to study Indian art in India and vice versa. Indian artists went to China and Japan to study tradition. Here is an artist whose work I admire. Just an example of his work, Japanese in form, done by the Indian artist Nandalal Bose. You can see his hanko right there. It says Nandalal Bose on the date that he had done it. It looks Japanese in form, but it's not. He is also the artist who has illustrated the entire Constitution of India. Indian Constitution, brand stamp looks like Japanese work. Look at the right, the woodblock looking print work of Mahatma Gandhi, woodblock impressionism of Japan, made quite an impression in the Indian Constitution, didn't it? But look at the larger picture. Japanese art, influenced centuries ago by India, influences India right back. I loved that. Full circle. All my 51 years of voyages of discovery, this amalgam of my Western and Indian upbringing, what is it that I behold when I come to this point now? Because all my meandering stop right here, always with Yorubushi. What exactly was the opening of Frankenstein? What is it that Adam says? Because among the books that Frankenstein, in the story of Frankenstein, the creature reads is the Sorrows of Young Werther, Milton's Paradise Lost. In Paradise Lost, it's on the cover. Adam says in Paradise Lost, effectively, he asks God, "Did I ask you to make me?" He demands, "You have an obligation to me. Did I ask you to make me?" There's a scripture that says, doesn't it? Born in darkness, I emanate light. Listen to what that says. Lucifer. What does that mean? The term means bring light, a light bringer. That's what Lucifer means. And we always, in everywhere I look, the Christian symbol of light, let there be light. And yet you call him Lucifer. Okay, let there be light. Have you ever looked at light? They use it on prisoners to tell them make the truth. Blinds you. Too much light you cannot see. It's a distraction to keep your sense alert. Distracts you from looking within. And so this blind man of Yorobushi, this Japanese painting brings me to my Indian core completely. Shoma means the moon. What is more appropriate for an object that is a reflector of light than the eternal plea? O sun, withdraw thy rays, reveal thy exceeding beauty to me, and let me realize that the person who is there is the one who I am. Let me see myself, meander back through life into the central point. What am I? The ultimate destination of any voyage any of us take to make it worthy.